Coming up on PolicyWise.
What we're doing is we're basically trying to get young people vaccinated. Only 32% of young people right now, like 0 to 17, are vaccinated, which is not a lot at all. And like a good amount of them are like only partially vaccinated, which isn't great because of accessibility. Like it's so much better to have like a vaccine clinic in like your neighborhood park.
It sounds like what Vaccinate 58 is doing is really trying to also making vaccines accessible to young people who are maybe in situations where their parents maybe aren't on board with them getting vaccinated.
I kind of went behind my mom's back to get the vaccine. It was a crazy moment. I got it at a drag show. It was great.
Passed through the assembly last week, which is a really good sign.
I know in San Francisco, I think it's more broadly just medical autonomy for people 12 and older.
A lot of us don't have control over what happens to us because our parents, their views don't align with it, or they have specific religious or political beliefs that we don't necessarily align with. I think something I've noticed is when it comes to a lot of services and things that people depend on is that they are still kind of abundant in North Side, but when it comes to places like Southeast and West Side, there really isn't much of anything. If you need something, you gotta wait in line for it for 2 hours or travel across city. And most of us can't do that. Most of the people on these sides of Fresno's work and we can't afford to take that time off. This is a lot, and it's really terrifying that a lot of people don't care and they're not taking it seriously. And, people walking around without masks and vaccines and spreading this disease that could very well kill people we love.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to PolicyWise. We're here to record another amazing episode today with some of our friends from Vaccinate All 58. I'm Ellie. Let me introduce myself first and foremost. I'm here to host with the one and only Michael Wiafe. We've got some wonderful guests here to talk about this campaign to get people vaccinated from COVID. So I'll kick it off to Ashens, one of our first guests. Can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, my name is Ashens Limon. My pronouns are he, him. I'm 17 years old. And right now I work with Rep 559 and we are doing a campaign called Vaccinate 58, basically trying to, get people vaccinated. I also do some youth journalism with the No Youth Media. And those are basically my priorities of what I'm doing right now.
Amazing. So great to have you on, Ashens. We also have another Michael on the call, our other guest. So it's a double Michael situation over here today. Michael, our guest, Michael, could you please introduce yourself and talk a bit about what you do with Vaccinate 58?
Hey, yeah, so I'm the other Michael. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a senior at Sunnyside High School. I'm 18 years old, and I've been doing a lot of work with the No Youth Media. And when it comes to like vaccines and this kind of work, I have more experience with other organizations like 99 Roots and Power California. As far as Vaccinate 58 goes, I haven't done much on this campaign. It's mainly been Ashens, him and Kato like spearheading this. I kind of just got pulled in for a couple of the things in this.
That was me in PolicyWise. They'll rope you in and they'll get you. You think you're coming for one thing, and then all of a sudden you're there a year later and you're doing the most with everyone. It's great. Okay, yes. Well, thank you guys both for joining. I'm really excited to have you both on. Ashens, maybe since you are a bit more involved with Vaccinate 58, can you tell us a bit more about what this campaign is? Like, what is it? What are you trying to accomplish? Yeah, and I guess what does your guys' work look like?
What we're doing is we're basically trying to get young people vaccinated. And like mobilize vaccine continue to do that, because like right now I feel like we're like at the quote unquote end of COVID, even though it's COVID's still going. What is it? It's like only 32% of young people right now, like 0 to 17, are vaccinated, which is not a lot at all. And like a good amount of them are like only partially vaccinated, which isn't great. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is having a mobile vaccine clinic, which I think personally is super important because of accessibility. Like it's so much better to have like a vaccine clinic in like your neighborhood park, like a 5-minute walk, than having it at like a CVS that can be hard to get to, or like having it at a clinic that a lot of the time is difficult for a lot of us to get to, especially with appointments and things like that. And we're also trying to put out education into Fresno about the vaccines, because a lot of like misinformation comes, everywhere. But especially in Fresno, since how our politics of the county are, it's super important to get like information out there. We're doing a lot on our social media page. Where we're trying to send out as much information as we can, really, and continue to start mobilizing vaccines again.
It sounds like what Vaccinate 58 is doing is really trying to also make vaccines accessible to people. And part of that group, I mean, all of us are included in that, is young people, and making vaccines accessible to young people who are maybe in situations where their parents maybe aren't on board with them getting vaccinated. I believe the age of consent for vaccines in San Francisco is 12 years old. Can either of you talk a bit about what that age of consent for vaccines, what that means, why it's important, particularly now amidst COVID-19 and the potential for vaccine mandates to be affecting people?
That policy is called SB 866, which I personally have a really deep connection to, because my like whole vaccine story is I kind of went behind my mom's back to get the vaccine. It was a crazy moment. I got it at a drag show. It was great. That's why I think mobilizing vaccines is also super important, because like being able to have mobility, go somewhere that's near you, is important. But yeah, a lot of parents have a hard time with the vaccine, especially in Fresno, where we're predominantly Hispanic, people of color. And a lot of the time we think about like vaccinations, like people who are anti-vax being like these like crazy white people who don't want to listen to the government. But we also need to understand that there's like a lot of historical stuff with people of color and vaccines, and that there's like real fear there. And, specifically with my family, that's really where the fear was coming from. And I feel that it's important for young people to be able to have control of their own body, because us young people know a little more about like what's going on right now, and we should have the right to be able to get vaccinated at whatever age without having to go behind our parents' back. I think like a lot of like vaccines for STIs and things like that are like legal for young people to get. Yet like the vaccine for COVID, which is like crazy, like people are dying, people are having a hard time with this, and I feel like that should be like a priority of what we should make legal for young people to consent about. But yeah, it's right now it's like just in San Francisco, but it's also like going through like all of the parts of government right now in California to try to implement it in like all counties everywhere in California, which I'm super excited about. I'm really following that because I think it's important, and like going and seeing what I've been through, and like seeing other like young people struggle with like just feeling the guilt, feeling scared about like getting COVID, about getting their family COVID, is really real.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm definitely gonna try to tap into that story that you mentioned. We're definitely getting back around to your vaccination story later. I guess about the statewide level or the statewide push for this, do you have any information on what that's looking like right now? Is this something that, I don't know, does it sound or does it seem like this is something that we could see passed on a statewide level, having young people have this medical autonomy at age 12 to get vaccinated? I guess what's the, I don't want to use the word vibe, but what's the vibe of this policy at the statewide level right now?
That was funny, Ellie.
I know, good. I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't think of another word on the fly.
No,
we just had to. What's the vibe?
Honestly, valid. There is a vibe going on. So it is like actually like going through like the government, and it's not like just an idea that's being put out there. It's like it's happening, and it hasn't gotten to Governor Newsom yet. It's getting there. It will. I don't know specifically where it's at. I don't know how too much of California politics work, but it's in there. It's deep, like in the thing. But right now, a lot of like anti-vax folks are against it, as they will be, and I feel like that's probably one of the biggest pushbacks right now. Like right now, it's like passed through like the courts with like the minimum amount of votes like to get it there, which is but at least it's out there, and I feel like if we get it to Newsom, I'm like 80% sure that it'll be passed. I don't see why it wouldn't be, you know? But yeah, right now we're just seeing a lot of pushback from anti-vax folks and like saying like don't control my kids' bodies, stuff like that, even though, young people deserve to do what they want to their bodies, especially when it comes to their health.
Totally.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If you don't mind me hopping in here, Ellie, I thought I'd talk about where the bill's at. I did look it up actually before the episode started and was just kind of doing a little bit of digging. It is moving through, and it is like one of the hot pieces, I would say, because just yesterday it was referred to a committee, which means that they're making decisions on it, like as we speak, basically. And it passed through the assembly last week, which is a really good sign, which means it passed one of the houses. It'll have to go through another house, and then if they make major changes, it'll have to go back to the original house and then to the governor if approved. But it's looking like it's along party lines, which is somewhat classic. But it looks like it's going to get to Governor Newsom's desk, I think, unless there's any major changes that occur in the next few weeks. And there's no budget on it, and so nobody's going to be too angry, since they're not going to have to shell out any money.
Do either of you know, is this about just straight up vaccine consent? Is that what the statewide bill is about? Because I know in San Francisco, I think it's more broadly just medical autonomy for people 12 and older, which has other medical implications, which maybe we could get into as well. So do either of you know if this is just vaccine?
I think so, because the title of the bill itself is Minors Vaccine Consent.
Perfect. Yep, that answers my question. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess going back to the San Francisco policy of just more broad medical autonomy for young people, are there other relevant implications about this? I know there's obviously a pretty broad national conversation right now about abortion access. Do you guys have any thoughts about what this medical autonomy is looking like in San Francisco in regards to, I guess, just beyond vaccines?
Well, I definitely think this is a part of a broader conversation about, like young people having control over their bodies. If you see in San Francisco, there's already a precedent for this. They have laws that say people 12 years and older can consent to things like reproductive care and other medical help like that. So, there's already a precedent for stuff like this, but I definitely think that it's not just going to be related to vaccines, because once this gets passed, a lot more people are going to be seeing young people as more capable, I guess. They're going to start giving us more bodily autonomy, more control over our lives, because specifically with this vaccine issue, but also with a lot of other things like reproductive health, a lot of us don't have control over what happens to us because our parents, their views don't align with it, or they have specific religious or political beliefs that we don't necessarily align with. So it's just, I think this is definitely going to have like more ramifications nationally when it comes to young people having control.
And that really makes me wonder, kind of around like, now I'm forgetting the word. Political.
The word is not vibes. That's for sure vibes. What it's not.
Definitely not vibe. Polarization, that's the word. Like political polarization between generations. This is basically, I mean, at this point, for some reason, vaccine hesitancy is very real and has become a political issue. That individual health has become a political issue. And because there seems to be an intergenerational line with, some folks of the generations before us and then young people who are growing up with a different set of access to information at a younger age, I'm just seeing this as good that young people have access to healthcare that for their own benefit, regardless of their parents' political beliefs. But also, I wonder just how much this also is a sign of political polarization between generations. That was not a question, and it wasn't going anywhere. It was just more of a comment and just kind of observing how the world is changing.
Yeah. I mean, I also think in terms of how the world is changing, I've been noticing, I mean, I'm here in Berkeley, and on campus, I remember it was like February or something, and they got rid of in-class mask mandates out of nowhere. Like no one had even asked for that, really, and I remember just being so shocked. And I think what we're seeing is that in a lot of ways, COVID is now being downplayed, even in areas that like once had some of the strictest lockdown procedures in place. And I kind of want to talk about this. I feel like it's a conversation that's not being had as often as it should be, but about how COVID is both impacting the disabled community while also actively creating disabilities in some people due to its long-term health effects. And yeah, I mean, do you think that this is a piece of the conversation that's missing? Do you think that this is an issue that COVID is now being downplayed as maybe something that's not as much of a threat to public health for the general population while actively ignoring the harms that it can pose to the disabled community?
I think this definitely is a missing piece of the conversation. Since the start of the pandemic, we've seen a very blatant disregard for disabled people from policymakers and even our own communities. We see a lot of the time that people say, it's okay that only certain people are dying. It's okay that only high risk people are dying because they had these pre existing conditions. We're seeing that like a lot of disabled people are basically being dehumanized, that their deaths are being labeled as okay because what they're less than. It's really disgusting, and a lot of people blatantly ignore it because it doesn't affect them, because they're not disabled or their families aren't. So why should they care? But a lot of us have a disabled family or we're disabled, and this is a lot, and it's really terrifying that a lot of people don't care and they're not taking it seriously. And people walking around without masks and vaccines and spreading this disease that could very well kill people we love. And a lot of people completely ignore that because they don't know what that's like. I think it's definitely more important that we start settling disabled people. We really need to put their needs at the front because they're the most vulnerable. And I think any policy making or any time we deal with a situation like a pandemic, we should be centering the most vulnerable people first. So yeah, I definitely think that's a huge part of the conversation that needs to be brought up more.
Yeah, like you said, it is a piece of the conversation that we're not seeing on the scale that we should be seeing it. And I think a lot of the messaging that we see around COVID right now is about, it's almost like a celebratory thing. Like, okay, like finally we're getting back to this sense of normal. And a lot of people are really excited about that. And that's really what we're seeing at the forefront. So I guess, what would you both say is important in terms of how should we restructure this conversation? Like, what messaging should we be having to maybe help people who are not tapped into this issue begin to understand the severity of COVID and how it's still a really important issue that needs to be taken seriously now and also moving forward?
And also, when we think about, I mean, right now the issue is COVID, but in the future, there's likely going to be some other health things that are going around where young people may need to access their own healthcare. And so it's also thinking about policy as not only doing what we need to do for right now to make sure that people have the resources that they need and are protected, but also how do we write something that's going to last, outlive the current issue of today, and still be able to apply to issues that might rise in the future. And that's where it gets a little bit more theoretical. And I think that this is kind of pushing the bounds of the way that the US has handled health issues in the past, whether it's the AIDS epidemic or whether it's some others, in allowing young people to have a little bit more agency there.
I'm just curious, how do we start changing this messaging, or what would you both say is important to, what is the word that we should be getting out there in order to get people to start taking this issue more seriously if they're not really tapped into how this impacts the disabled community still?
I feel like the system has never been here for disabled people. Like, the acknowledgement of disabled people, the representation of disabled people has never been a priority for the United States, for like our government. And I feel like one of the first steps to that is again education. Being like understanding that like the mask mandate isn't just like, oh, like we're wearing masks, like so we need to keep each other safe. Like, this was literally killing people. Like, this is disabling people. We can't keep having like these like celebrations about COVID when like COVID's not over. This is still a thing. Like, there can be like 3 people with COVID and COVID isn't over. Like, this is like a real thing going on, and like this is like hurting people, and like this is like making people like financially unstable. It's doing a lot of things than just making a few people sick. And I feel like, again, education, we need to tell people like this, like understand like who you're hurting, like with your attitude like this, by not getting vaccinated, by not wearing masks.
Is this type of education, or I guess information sharing, something that Vaccinate 58 is also trying to do as a campaign?
Totally, definitely. All types of education is really what we want to get out there. I feel like disability representation is especially important because it's not something that we see as often as we should. And as like a campaign that we're doing, we need to push that out there as like to be responsible, you know? Um, but I feel like that's something that we can really get into in Vaccinate 58.
As we've just been saying right now, there's obviously still severe health implications from COVID that need to be taken seriously. But are there also any implications for like federal and private like workers' disability insurance programs and I guess support services that we're seeing? Like on the policy side of this, how is the spread of COVID and how is COVID as it affects our disabled community impacting some of these support services that we see and that people rely on?
Okay, so when it comes to like the services and everything the government gives, the vibe, it's not popping. It is not there. I have my mom is like really high risk. She has a lot of disabilities, and so I've pretty much grown up knowing how messed up that system is. It's always been trash, and I guess COVID has really exposed that. It's kind of dug that up. We're seeing with like long COVID and a lot of the health issues that come with having COVID. We're getting a lot more disabled people now and a lot more people who need to rely on these systems. And not only that, the people who already do need to more so because the risk that COVID poses. And we're seeing that the structure isn't built to support that. I mean, it was barely able to support the people it had before the pandemic. And now it's being overloaded and it can barely hold itself up. So I guess it's just showing like how little the government actually puts into those services, how I guess ineffective they are. Because like I said before, I mean it was near impossible to actually get any assistance from those programs. You had to basically sacrifice an arm and a leg in like 3 work weeks to try getting anything done, and now it's even harder. So I guess it's just showing how awful the system's always been, and now people are starting to realize that this needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think we've been talking about this in some ways on kind of a statewide or a broader level, but y'all are based in Fresno, at least the two of you are, even though it's a statewide campaign. And I'm curious what this, return to normalcy as it's as it's being called from COVID is playing out on a local level around you. Like what are you both seeing in terms of maybe what services or access to vaccines or testing is like no longer being offered? Just I guess what's the vibe of COVID and this return to normalcy in Fresno?
We're having like less clinics go on in Fresno. Clinics are really sparse and like just hard to get in an appointment in general. I find that a lot because I'm always a little sick. But yeah, we're getting less funding from the government for COVID related things, like having mobile vaccines just on every corner, like it was like in the beginning of the pandemic. It's basically, oh, it's all normal now here in Fresno, even though it's not, especially here because we're the 5th biggest city in California, and it's really dense here. It's really like a lot of people in one place type thing. And when one like small outbreak happens, it affects all of Fresno. And I think that we really need to recognize that and keep continuing to have these like vaccine clinics, to have these COVID testing sites instead of just it's all normal now type thing.
And where do you get your ideas from? I mean, is there another part of California? Like, where do you pull from some of these ideas, or are you just kind of homegrown? Having discussions with folks, growing it at home, and saying this is what will work for my community.
I see a lot of like different things from different areas of California, where it's like I'll see a video and I'm like, why don't we have that in Fresno? I think Fresno is, as much of a big city we don't have as many services as many other cities because of one reason or another. We're like a red county, and I think that really plays into like the reasons why we don't see a lot of the services that we could have, especially like pertaining to COVID. It's just kind of like when it's done type thing, especially with our mayor Jerry Dyer, who I don't love. he's a sucky person, and like he's gonna be like, once like COVID is over, COVID is over. He's not gonna want to put any more money into like the education, into vaccine clinics, into like continuing to mobilize vaccines. And I think that we really need to talk about it right now before it goes way too far and like we're just not seeing anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious what this, I guess kind of defunding of a lot of these services and accessibility just decreasing for things like vaccines and for testing, how is this impacting you and your communities on, I guess, a daily or a weekly basis? How is this actually affecting the people that maybe rely on these services or really need them to feel secure, safe, or to be healthy?
Yeah, like accessibility is one of the biggest things in my opinion when it comes to services pertaining to COVID, because like again, a lot of things in Fresno are really sparse. You can only go to a specific area to get those types of services, and we need like these things everywhere. Right now, what we're really seeing is like, mask mandates going down. Right now, I like just got an email yesterday from Fresno City. I go to Fresno City, and like saying that we no longer need a vaccine mandate, and that how like masks are optional starting in the next semester or the summer semester. And like I'm so concerned about that, especially here in Fresno where like, things are densely populated, and like again, like I said, once one outbreak happens, we're all sick. It's all over. And like with this funding not being here like just already, like it's going to be a bit of a shit show, and I think that we need to prioritize this before everything else comes, because right now, we're seeing no like lowering the vaccine mandate, no more masks type thing, and like people are excited about this, and like I'm not saying we shouldn't, but we shouldn't. We should acknowledge like the people that we can be getting sick, like the disabled community, like communities that have really low access to things, like vaccines, like testing, and like right now, like if you get COVID, you only get like a week off, and like that's crazy. Like we really need to monitor COVID right now. We need to monitor the sickness because it's not gonna be great.
I think something I've noticed is when it comes to a lot of services and things that people depend on, is that they are still kind of abundant in North Side for the young white people. But when it comes to places like Southeast and West Side, there really isn't much of anything. If you need something, you got to wait in line for it for 2 hours or travel across city. And most of us can't do that. Most of the people on these sides of Fresno's work, and we can't afford to take that time off. So I think the community, Jerry Dyer, yeah, when Ashton said for one reason or another, we knew he was the reason. He very much likes to project the image that he cares about the community, but we see that the community he cares about is not all of Fresno. It's, like I said, North Side, or the areas with young rich white people who bring in money and the kind of attention that he wants. So yeah, I guess the services are still there. It's just not accessible for the people who need them most, and that's something that needs to be prioritized more. Because right now the people who have the most access are the people who are already the most protected, and that's not the vibe.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's a wonderful point. I mean, as much as the COVID conversation has maybe fizzled out is the wrong phrase, but I guess been kind of diminished or downplayed on a broad national scale, I think it's really important to think about the equity component of this too, where this is an issue where we need equity for young people, we need equity for people of color, we need equity for low-income communities, and equity for disabled communities who are being like unduly marginalized by this issue and unsupported by this issue. So yeah, I think that was a wonderful point, Michael, and thank you for bringing that up. I guess I think it's time for the personal vaccination story, Ashens, if you're feeling up for it. I'd love to know what that experience was like, and I guess kind of the personal aspect of this, and how, I mean, your story, I'm sure, is one that's probably similar to a lot of other young people who are maybe struggling to get vaccinated. So I'd love to hear it.
Let me be a little quiet right here because my walls are right there. She knows now, but it was a wild moment. It was, what month is it? It was this time last year, like right when like the vaccine like was approved and stuff, and every all my like my boyfriend Michael, our other friends had it, and like I felt just like, like this isn't like, I need to take care of myself. Like I was scared of getting COVID. I was scared of giving my family COVID because they're not vaccinated, and they were already like against it. I had asked my mom if I can get it, and she was like, yeah, no, definitely not. And I was like, okay, cool, I'm not gonna ask you again because you're gonna just say no again type thing. And it was kind of a last minute decision. We went to a drag show, me and Michael, and they were having like a mobile vaccine clinic there, and I was like, okay, how am I gonna get this vaccine without like my parents' consent? And what I did is I FaceTimed my dad, and I was like, give me, that man was not in his right mind at the time, but like he was like, oh yeah, sure, go give my kid the vaccine, just not the Johnson & Johnson one. And I was like, okay, chill out. But yeah, and then I got like my first vaccine right there, and like after that, like I didn't get my next vaccine until like November, like until recently, which I think is another thing that like happens a lot. Like as we can see, like only like the numbers aren't correct when it comes to like getting your second vaccine, and I feel like a lot of that comes to accessibility, which is like which was my issue. Like I wasn't able to just like go to the clinic that was in Fresno City from where I was at because it was just too far for me to go, and I don't drive, so it was inaccessible for me. And then I graduated high school early, and to get into Fresno City, you have to be vaccinated, which I think is super important, and which really kind of forced me into getting the next vaccine. And so I was able to go to CVS. I had my boyfriend drive me and get me the next vaccine. And yeah, basically it was with like no knowledge of my family at all. And once they did find out, it was like pretty bad. It was really awful for like a good like 4 months about like me betraying the family type thing. And I feel like a lot of kids with like anti-vax family have to go through that a lot and like compromise their health just for the opinions of other people. My family, they got COVID in the beginning of the year, and my baby brother was just born, so he was just about like 3 months, and he ended up getting COVID, and I was the only one who didn't get COVID. And it was like really stressful for me because I was like, okay, like he's like 3 months and he has COVID, and like we're still like looking at it like in this way where it's like, this is the health of people. Like we're hurting people, we're hurting the baby, we're hurting everybody in this family right now because we're not vaccinated. And like that was like really, I mean, I was already like open to like the vaccine, of course, but it was really eye-opening to me like how this is really hurting people, how this is hurting like the babies, how this is hurting like the older people. Like my mom right now, like her hair has just been falling out because of COVID, because she had it in the beginning of the year, which is like apparently like a thing that happens. My aunt, who's a nurse, was telling us about it, and she's like, your guys' hair might fall out, just so you know, which is like crazy. And I feel like, oh, we also need to talk about like the long-term effects of COVID, how like this is affecting our body. Like we don't know what the future has to come. Like a lot of people's like taste and smell have been gone for like a good year, and it's crazy. And we really need to monitor how COVID is like affecting us long term, and like also acknowledge how just COVID is happening. And we need to realize, that's why I'm really stuck on the like getting young people to have like vaccine consent, because of situations like this where they don't have to necessarily go behind their parents' back and like do something like sort of illegal to get a vaccine. We deserve to have our to have health, to have health care without like having to do it like under the table type thing. We are able to consent to our bodies when it comes to healthcare like that. We deserve to be protected you know?
Yeah, that's wow. Just a really profound story and experience, and I think it really does, like you said, speak to how this isn't just a debate of like ideologies or outlooks or political preference or anything. This is an issue that actively harms people, that actively has health outcomes, and yeah, medical autonomy for people is something that's very, very important.
Something I've been just thinking about, like, what are some new and innovative ways to get young people vaccinated if they get to make their own decision? And I'm thinking like vaccination sites at schools, after like, after school programs. You'd be able to have those conversations in the classroom, and it wouldn't be like some political news that happens of the day. Like, teachers will be able to educate students on their own bodies. Like, imagine your health class when you're able to actually make these decisions. It's not just like, oh, when you're an adult, it's gonna be like, oh no, you could do this now. Anyway, those are just the things running through my head of like, it's not just young people being able to make those decisions, but it's gonna open the door to an entire access it's gonna open the door for further access to information, for young people to be able to make their own decisions, which I don't think that there is any negatives to, and we need to be doing quite a bit more of that. But that's a rant for another day.
1000%. Absolutely agreed. I know we asked this at the beginning of our conversation as well, but I think given what we've talked about today, what do you think the key takeaways are about what Vaccinate 58 is trying to accomplish, why this work is important? And yeah, I guess the final takeaways of what you want our listeners to know regarding this campaign and these efforts and what the vision is moving forward.
What other Michael was talking about. When we're mobilizing vaccines right now, we're trying to get into youth spaces, specifically like we're thinking of skate parks, things like that. There's like a really big skate park in Fresno, which I think is really important for us to go and have a clinic at. It's called Lions Park, and it's just a really big community of people over there. And to get it there is to get into the youth, is to get into the people who really need it, you know? And like I said, education is like the big thing that like I'm really focused on, and mobilizing accessibility type thing to give the people of Fresno like the education to say like we're okay, like we can get the vaccine, like we don't have to be so fearful of it. Like I said, there's a lot of history with people of color in vaccines, and that's what, coming from a family who is anti-vax, that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing like what the concerns are about the vaccine, and I feel like that gives me a really different perspective of what other people see when it comes to anti-vax people. And like with that, I feel like I can use what I'm hearing from my family into like, this is the facts, this is the truth, this is what's really going on.
Education is really important. Education is like, it's kind of like its own virus, but good, because like once you put it in the community, it keeps spreading, and it's really important that our communities are educated on things like this, especially with how devastating it's been to us over the past few years. When it comes to this work in general, I think the most important thing for me, at least, is focusing on the individual, because we see a lot of like the policymakers, and a lot of the conversation around COVID is centered around this group mentality of most of us are okay, the healthy ones are okay, so this is fine. They've kind of labeled the ones that have died like acceptable, I guess, and I don't think they're acceptable deaths at all. So I think it's really important to go back to the individual and saying like, these are people, each and every one of them are people that we need to protect. So I think that's just why this kind of work in education is so important, because we need to get more people in those mentalities.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. This has been an amazing conversation. You both are really insightful about this issue. I feel like I've learned a lot and had my perspective definitely get a vibe check during this conversation. So I really appreciate you both joining us. I'm really excited about the work that you're doing with Vaccinate 58, and I'm excited to see how that continues and plays out. And I'll definitely be watching the bill that's in the legislature and see how that goes in terms of statewide vaccine accessibility for young people. So yeah, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was cool getting to talk to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's great to hear you all doing such impactful work for your community at such a young age. I did not think about it that early on. So that's really awesome. This was PolicyWise, an intergenerational podcast by Youth Leadership Institute focused on bringing young people into the policy conversation.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at PolicyWise Pod. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to discuss, please slide into our DMs or send us an email at policywise@yli.org.
And stay tuned for upcoming episodes.